The Germany trip, or the Berlin trip to be more precise, I found it amazing. I loved it, learnt lots, spoke lots. We've got a few potential guests coming up into the future as well from the Berlin trip. And today we're going to talk about that. John, initial thoughts?
Yeah, I can't wait. It was amazing. My brain hurt, and it was amazing.
Your legs probably hurt as well from all the walking that we had to do.
Yes, yeah. This dude walks a lot, 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 a lot.
And it was like 30 degrees.
Yes, and it was 30 degrees.
I don't know what that
And I
is in
came
Fahrenheit.
home, and for context, I came back from that. I went straight to another one, and it was like I was like, "Yeah, I'm not walking too much. I'm already in enough agony as it is." But we
I
ended up walking, so there we go.
Lovely. Yeah, and it's funny. I think the university itself is one of the bigger universities that I've been to. I've been to a fair amount of universities because obviously went to uni, did that sort of thing, went to other unis for conferences and talks and other competitions and stuff in sport. But the building was huge. Like the main building was huge, and the
Yeah.
staircases.
Oh my gosh.
I I really like this. I'm quite an active person, which I think John found out. And I'm a fidget. Yeah, I'm just a fidget. So I walk at all the places and go. I wanted to go up all the stairs. We went up the stairs once, and I was like, okay, this is actually a bit of a mission to get up all of these stairs. Because imagine like each floor is essentially two, maybe three flights of stairs because of how wide the landings are. So you're going up tons and tons of stairs. We had to go up to floor 3 every day. Well, I say every day, both days. So yeah, that was fun.
No, it wasn't. I'm an asthmatic. It was not fun.
Yeah, the lifts weren't great, and it was certainly an interesting experience from my side because I don't know German. I don't speak any German. Like I know Danke. That's like it, which is thank you, I think. So
Which
seeing
you didn't use once.
no, because it's just not natural. Like I have to think about saying Danke, like in German. Like I have to, but when I'm just in a conversation, I'm just speaking. It's not something I'm cognitively aware of. I need to speak this language to that person because the only reason I know the word it's like bonjour in French. It's just like the word of that language that I don't remember from school. But yeah, so interacting with other people was fun. It was fun. It was interesting. And most, just as a precursor, yes, the lectures were in English. So I did know what was going on. But there were people from all over the world, like Canada, Spain, France, I think. Obviously, Germans there as well. But yeah, it was a really good time. Loads of people to speak to.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really good. Even for my completely, if we want to put a label on it, introverted brain. I think I stayed out and spoke more than I loved. I knew that face was coming. I
I
knew that
fight
face was
you.
coming. For someone who is drained by social experiences, it was still a good experience.
Let's get into this because I think it's going to take a while. The first lecture, I think, was probably the worst lecture you could start with because picture this, we've just turned up to Berlin. We've just found the university. We're hot. We're somewhat like sweaty, tired, and we go directly into dynamical systems theory inside of how the math works. Like that was the first lecture. So we went straight into things like attractors, phase space, phase transitions, bifurcations, and loads of mathematical equations that have derivatives with like x dot and x dot dot and loads of math for just over
That was
2 hours.
intense.
Just over 2 hours as well.
Was it two?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because remember there were meant to be 3 lectures on the first day, but the lady couldn't make it, so Vincent and Guy both had to like extend their lectures. So Vincent just kept talking, and it was like 2.5 hours, and Guy spoke for about 1 hour 40. So yeah, that first dynamical systems lecture was 2.5 hours about math.
It was mathy.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain all of the math that he was talking about, I'm not gonna obviously use the math. I'm not gonna use the math because without visuals, math is hard enough as it is. But I already had a lot of this in my mind from other videos I'd watched, other education that I'd gone through. And the way that I think the phase space analogy or imagery is the easiest way to go through the math. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So imagine you have a flat surface, like a grid flat surface in your mind, and it goes up and down in different places like hills. So sort of hills appear in some places, and then you have troughs or crevices in other places, right? Peaks and troughs all over the place in this somewhat 3D space, right? Essentially, if it goes down, then gravity, if you want to use a sort of force in your mind, forces you down the hole, and it somewhat attracts you into that direction. That's basically an attractor. There's loads of math behind it. Not going to go into it. Oh, look at that, John's showing some pictures.
I just thought we were mentioning pictures. That's not the one you wanted, I don't think, but that's one of them.
No, that's not the one I wanted. That's yeah, that works. That's not the one I had in my head, but that works.
There you go, people. Math.
Yeah, graphs and maths and parabolas and all the stuff. But yeah, so essentially the dip is an attractor. You get attracted to something. And to put this in what I would call layman's terms, this would be something that you're more likely to do, or you're more driven towards, or it grabs your attention, or those sorts of things. So applying that practically inside of what we've spoken about before with affordances is, okay, I've got 4 screens. I'm attracted to doing something with them. Like if I don't have something on a screen, it's a little bit off. So the affordance in the environment is to do something with the screen, and there is an attractor to put something on it. That's the way that I would see that practically applied. This is theoretically explained. Does that make sense to you, John? Because obviously you're in the lecture as well, yeah?
Yeah, that is kind of the best explanation and what I took away from it, pretty much.
Yeah, of course, those that are heavy into ecological psychology and all the dynamical systems theory will probably wince and go, no, that's oversimplified. In which case I say, please come on and explain it in a better way.
Yeah, please do.
So, phase space is the next point that I have that I want to go through. And phase space, I think, is where time and the whole quantum world of quantum physics and stuff comes into this math and this physics and all this behind the scenes stuff. The way I see it, the way I see phase space is just time. It's just moving forwards in time, and the phase space is the lens at which you look at the information at that point in time. So you take your picture, and then you look through whatever microscope lens which gives you the phase space you want to look at, because there are varying levels of phase space. That's where the whole differential equations come in with x dot and x dot dot, insert x dot to 7. I think there's 7 dots or something.
Yeah. Dot plus dot dot with dotty dot dot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Snap, crackle, pop.
Oh yeah, Rice Krispies snack. That's not us being loopy. That was actually explained. I think that was the Canadian lecturer. She said that, wasn't it?
Yeah, because pop was one of the numbers, and I think that was like 4 or 5 dots. And then someone just put snap and crackle, seriously, because
it's just easy to remember.
It was just easy to remember.
Yeah, but we have no evidence to back that up. That was just what we heard. So, yep. Yeah, so phase space is essentially the space at which you look at the phase you're in, which it's a nice idea in an abstract world. Applying it practically, no idea. Like,
yeah, that was one of the things that I had from this, is that a lot of it was very theoretical and very hard, which I know that's kind of the darn point. But it's really hard to turn it into practical. This is how I could speak about this in a business context. This is how I could speak about this in a learning context. This is how I could speak about it at all, without it being really complicated maths and only fellow complicated mathematicians would understand. Um,
I think it comes back to what Feynman was saying. So in the video where I talk about Feynman's technique and how it's BS, Feynman talks about him. He basically says to a reporter that he cannot explain magnets to him because the reporter doesn't understand magnets the same way Feynman does. And I think the phase space is a perfect example of this. If you
yeah.
understand the phase space, then you can explain it to other people that understand it. If they don't get it, it's almost pointless. And actually, this is going to go off in a bit of a sideways direction. I was in a conversation yesterday with UK Coaching. So UK Coaching is I think it's the governing body of UK sports coaching. They're all sports coaches, and the presenter, the educator, was a former FA tutor mentor. The presentation was interesting, triggered conversation, but they were discussing how adding terms should be done, and the educator should be explaining those terms to make it simple. And I didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I didn't like that is because when you add terms and words in, you inevitably add in labels. And adding in labels means you need to remember the name of the thing. And if you need to remember the name of the thing and you forget the name of the thing, now you're like, wait, am I doing that or am I not doing that? Am I applying that? How do I do? And it becomes a memory game of, I need to remember the time, the date, the person, the thing, and all these labels. So if you forget the label for a second, you just explain what the behaviors are, what the actions are. Then when the person grasps that and they understand it, they've got something to hold on to, you can then explain, oh, well, that is whatever the label thing is. This is the ecological approach. This is the cognitive psychology approach. I think he was talking about ribosomic learning or something like that. Basically, it's the constraints-led approach, but a different name for it. And that's the biggest issue I have with these namings of things, is when you go look at the academic literature, you can have like 50 different academics calling the same thing so many different names. You're like, forget about the names. Just what is the thing?
We had that experience. I got to the same section you were talking about in the Ecological Psychology book, Introduction to Ecological Psychology, where there was just so many names being used for something was covering something else.
Yeah.
And there was so many overly complicated, overly convoluted names that just didn't like it could be explained in this way. And I think something that while I was when I moved directly from one place, well, it was, educational, highly intelligent people to slightly differently intelligent people. I wouldn't say less intelligent, but just intelligent in different ways. It was quite interesting. And I think we had an experience on while waiting for our plane in explaining what we were doing. And that was like people understood it, maybe not to the extent that we do, quote unquote, but it was like, oh no, that's really interesting. Oh no, that is really interesting. Oh yeah, that's really, really interesting. And people are gravitating towards the conversations in an ecological approach. And it's interesting how quickly people are like, oh yeah, no, that's quite interesting. Yeah, that makes sense because I relate it back to this and relate it back to that. And it was really interesting, that experience that you were having, that I was part of, listening.
Collaborative cognition. Come on. That's
Collaborative, yes, that's what we called it. Collaborative cognition. Because we make the names too.
Yeah, we come up with stupid terms as well.
We clever clogs now.
Yeah. Yeah. We have brain inside skull. with more than one cell.
1.5. Yeah, collaborative cognition.
But which half is the store?
Yes, obviously. I miss these jokes. I really miss these jokes. I've not even tried. It's interesting how when I went from obviously this conference to Atomic, which is a business conference, how much language made me just go, oh. I was just so like, no, No. So one of the things that was said was we take in 676 pieces of information every 6 seconds, and I'm like, you one, even in the cognitive space, that is completely out of date, and two, no.
Caveat. How are they defining information?
They probably weren't.
That's what I'm thinking. I reckon what they've probably done, this is just me guessing here, they found a study that has a number and they used the number without actually looking at what the study was looking at. Because that's what most people do when they cite facts and figures. They find a study that has a number that they can use and go, science says blah, 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 blah. No, a paper said that, but that's not in the same context at which you're speaking in. So shut your hole. Yes, I agree. I think some of the conversations that this is something I've experienced a lot inside of academia is depending on the side of it depends on which side of the argument you're on, but a lot of people that this isn't political, this is just the word that comes to mind. A lot of those that are more liberally minded are much more open to different interpretations of words, so they're much more careful with the language they choose to use. Rather than being more definite with the words, they're open. Instead of saying, okay, this word, it could be this or this or this or that. And that's how I felt the eco-psychology world was. Like when we were in the beer garden after the lectures, it was memory or remembering or the process of everyone used 4 or 5 different descriptors for this concept they were trying to explain. Whereas when I'm in a typically cog psych world, they're like, oh yeah, memory. And that's just it. It's just a fairly definite thing, like a fact, a memory.
That is obviously not saying that everyone who is cog psych
No.
is not liberal.
No. I'm just saying, like, liberal use of language is where I was going with that. And that's where I'm like, it's so hard using words because they all have so many like background things. You're like, what word can I use here? I don't want to come up with another word because then people have to remember it. So it's like, throw off all the baggage of this word and then use the word for what it was intended for. But yeah, that's how I would see the eco-psych world. A lot of them are they are quite happy to use various words and terms for concepts because they recognize there are different meanings. I mean, I had a conversation as we were walking to the beer garden about one of the guys who was looking at developmental psychology inside of youths as they grow up, and we'll probably talk about some of that a little bit later. But he said, "Oh yeah, children don't have a meaning for words yet," and I was like, "Yes, they do. They have a meaning. It's just a different meaning from us."
Yeah.
And we got into that conversation as we were walking past the flamingos in the zoo, going to the beer garden that was over the bridge. So that was great fun. But those sorts of conversations, I struggled to have when I was at uni because my uni was heavily, well, the scientists anyway, were heavily in cog psych. They were Bayesian statistic, free energy principle, memory stores, all those sorts of things, which is not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. I have a different perspective, which would suggest that there is something inefficient about it. It's wrong. But it's a different way of looking at things. And that's the way that I prefer.
Yeah. It was interesting just hearing the conversations that we're having, that were having. Hearing the conversation.
English is hard.
English is hard. It makes no sense. Having just listening and being part of the conversations was really like, oh, cool, that's cool. I loved, I don't know whether you've put a note to touch on this, but it was interesting, the neurodiversity conversation, because you asked it. You got there before me because I was going to ask.
I haven't put a note on it, so let's talk about, actually, before we talk about it, bifurcation phase transition stuff, in my head, right, is different changes. Like over time, it's different changes. And that's where in my head I was going in the conversation. For context, everyone listening, we were in the beer garden, we were talking, I was talking to Guy, one of the guys that hosted the thing, we were discussing embodied extended cognition and lots of different areas, and bifurcations became part of the conversation in the way that we interpret information throughout time. And how we look at things differently, and how embodied cognition, or as we came to term it, collective cognition, when you're having a conversation with someone, because it's not embodiment of world and body in the sense that John and I like. We feel like embodiment is more organism specific, but when you have two organisms, it creates a system. And now it's not quite embodied cognition because you've got another organism there. So it's like it's connected or collaborative cognition.
Yeah, collaborative cognition. I think that's the nicest, that felt the cleanest way of describing it.
Yeah, so these bifurcations, these phase transitions, these changes through time suddenly make me question, okay, well, what about those that are somewhat labeled neurodivergent? Do they have a different experience with phase transitions, with a different experience through time? And I think that's a nice little setup for what you're going to say next.
Yeah, and it was interesting from, like, as a neurodiverse individual, note the language shift is not neurodivergent, neurodiverse. It's a subtle thing for me, but it means a lot in terms of my own like understanding. But it was basically, the question started with, what do you think of neurodivergent? And what do you think about it? And I was just like, yeah, doesn't make sense, which is grossly simplified. But it doesn't make sense because it's about the environment that you're in. And depending on the environment that you're in, influences everything. And they influence each other.
The thing that got me, which made me giggle, is we hadn't spoken about neurodiversity at all. And every single person, so this is day one, every single person there was, they understood ecological psychology, they understood embodied cognition, and they hadn't been prepped at all. And everyone had this same reaction. All of the other conversations had gone on for 20, 30 minutes. I introduced this topic and everyone was like, yeah, whatever, okay, it's a thing, cool. And that was it. Like, there was nothing else to expand on because it was just, yeah, environment changes, we all work different, so what? And that was the extent of the conversation, and it just moved straight on to another socially related thing, and you're like, oh, that's it, it's done, it's over. It's so quick.
It was really interesting as someone who identifies as that. I was like, but it makes sense to me, even though I have the label. It is part of who I am. It still makes it. Yeah, it's part of the environment that I'm in. If the environment is matching my need or like the things that I need, then I am attracted to that space, which means I'm good. But if it's not, then I'm not. And it's interesting how, like, in the kind of, well, the business world is the one I can, the business environment that I can talk about because I'm in it. There's a lot of call for neurodiverse business owners to be respected more and to develop, to have these environments and kind of like conversations to go in the direction where neurodiverse people are understood and cared about and etc and this and that. And I'm like, but they are in the environment that I'm in. Like, there isn't that experience of, yes, there is stuff that's being taught that doesn't match our experience, but it doesn't match anyone's experience. Like, it's a pure cog psych approach that is hyper generalized and doesn't fit anyone. And if it doesn't fit most people, the global population, it definitely doesn't fit neurodiverse individuals. With they do have unique different difficulties. Yes, they do have difficulties, but it depends on the environment. If the environment is built for them to be able to continue, then the difficulties are not the same.
Yep.
And so it was such a quick conversation, and I'm like, yes. And I think a lot of what I think stuff, yeah, go on.
I think that's what's most important to me, is that a lot of people are talking about ADHD, neurodiversity, neurodivergence, etc., and it's become this big conversation. And in this group of people, it was just a small footnote. You're like, yeah, okay, moving on. Like, it wasn't a significant conversation. And I know a lot of people would potentially take offense to that because, oh no, it's a big deal, you're minimalizing all of these issues, etc., etc. But they're not, and
No,
we're not. We're saying,
no.
yes, we agree with you, but it's not you, it's everyone. Everyone has embodied cognition. Everyone has struggles in some environments, some more than others, depending on the way that society has pushed XYZ into different directions. And I think this relates directly into my next point and the next lecture about embodied cognition.
Yeah.
Because Guy was talking about embodied cognition in the way that I experience what's called extended cognition.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of conflict there. For those unfamiliar, there are 4 E's of cognition that are spoken about a lot. You've got enactive, embedded, embodied, and extended.
And then you got letters that are added as well.
Yeah, forget those. So I'm going to leave enactive and embedded because enactive is much more philosophical than the others, and then embedded is pretty much just embodied, just a different variation of. So yes, you can argue backwards and forwards, and I'm sure other people will come on and argue their points of view. I think they're very, very similar though. The reason I had a bit of conflict with the embodied and the extended cognition is he was saying that embodied cognition is the world, the organism, and the brain, and said that extended cognition, there is a line. Where does the brain extend, like the cognition extend from the person? What counts as it being extended cognition? Is it just when it's next to you? Is it when you're engaging with it? And he couldn't see the line as to where the cognition was extended to. But I have the same feeling when I think about embodied cognition, like where is the line? And to me, it comes back to what Andy Clark called the parity principle. It may be from him, maybe from someone else, but the parity principle essentially suggests that if the thing in the cognitive environment is doing the same function as what you would expect a normal biological brain to do, then it's functioning in the same way as the brain, which means it must be part of cognition. And this is where I think I'm a little bit conflicted by embodied and extended as different things. I don't know what the difference is. When I really step back and look at it and go, what are the differences?
Yeah.
I really don't know. They are essentially the same thing, just a different word. And this is what Guy and I came to a conclusion and said, we're talking about the same thing, just with different words and different labels, which again is one of the issues with academia.
Yeah, I agree.
Got...
I didn't have any more. Yeah, and I think that is exactly it comes back to that. A lot of what was, it's the same question. It's the same thing, but just with a different word and a different phrase and a different thing used. And there is a point of like, does it really matter? This is the thing. This is the thing that we experience, which makes sense. Does it matter what we call the thing? As long as we both understand, like it goes back to that kind of labels versus the actual explanation of what the heck we're talking about. And something that I'm trying to do is shift my language to actually explain the thing I'm talking about rather than using the labels.
That's difficult
because that way it's clearer what it is. And it was interesting how much when I went to Atomicon, how everyone was just using labels. I'm just like, well, yeah, but what do you mean by that? I had multiple experiences in some of the workshops that some of the talks that I went to, where I had a very different expectation of what was going to be spoken about. Because when they say this thing, it was nowhere near what I was thinking the conversation was about. And it's like, okay, cool. You didn't go very deep. There was very little conversation actually had here.
Yeah, but I think that is where when it comes, going back to what we were saying about the conversations inside the eco-psych space, even though Guy and I were talking with different terms, extended, embodied, and then one of the other guys was talking about inactive, we're talking about 3 different types of cognition. We all know roughly what we're talking about, so we all interchangeably use those terms. If it was a if we were in an environment where someone didn't know what any of those terms were, using any of those terms would have been redundant. It would have been redundant information for that person to know, so there's no point adding in a label to overcomplicate the explanation.
Yeah.
So just explain what you're talking about. Right, now moving into day 2, this is where a lot of the, what did they call them? Fast talks? Flash talks. Yeah, flash talks came in. For those unfamiliar with the way the universities work, flash talks are essentially pitches by master students or PhD students or postdoc students to say, hey, here's my research. Is it any good? What do you think? Sort of thing. And there were quite a few of those that happened. Some of them were interesting, but I feel like a lot of them, this is me speaking retrospectively, of course, I feel like a lot of them, and obviously I felt this during listening, were very shallow. And I think they were deliberately shallow because they're masters and PhD theses, but they were shallow in that they had a question. But that was it. They didn't really explore ideas behind those questions often.
And I think it was very much, and one thing I noticed, it was because of how little time they had. Because a lot of them could have gone further. I could sense that some of them, not all of them, but some of them could have gone deeper, but couldn't due to the time constraint.
And that, to me, is where they're probably on their learning journey of explaining information. If you have 10 minutes to explain something, don't spend the first 2 minutes introducing the thing. You don't need to introduce the methods and the study and, hey, we're going to talk about ecological psychology. No shit. Like, the whole day is about this thing. Everyone in the room already knows probably the same amount, if not more, than the person presenting about the topic. So don't waste the time explaining that stuff. Actually dive into something that's interesting and pick one thing. You have 10 minutes. Don't pick 2 or 3 things to talk about because you've only got 10 minutes. 10-minute flies.
Do a podcast where you can talk about as many things as you fucking want at a time.
Well, I learned this skill when I was doing my degree because I had a module called, it was PPD, Personal and Professional Development. That was one of the modules I had. And the assessment was a reflective presentation. And we had 10 minutes in my second year to do a reflective presentation. So I had 10 minutes to talk about one thing. I had to learn how to be very precise with the words that I use and go deep quickly. Yes, there were questions afterwards to expand on questions that the head of course had, Jim had, but I still learned how to condense a lot of dense information in 10 minutes. And that's certainly a skill. If you're going to present information to an audience that know the topic, you don't need to introduce the topic. If they know a lot of the research, you don't need to introduce a lot of the research. And if they have a similar question to you, you don't need to explore the question further. Pitch the question, explore your thinking. Pitch the question in 1 minute, then explore your thinking in the next 3-4 minutes, then go deeper into potential solutions or directions you want to go into for the next 3-4 minutes, and it gives you a minute to spare to fiddle around with other things you may want to expand on.
Yeah.
So when it comes to a lot of these flash talks and my notes, I'm like, there's like nothing here. So we could probably rattle through some of the lectures. I've only got 11 points down inside of our notes, and there were 14 lectures. So 3 of them, I was like, yeah, just forget that. So going down, what is ecological psychology? How would you explain it?
As in the question or the actual thing?
Well, during the lecture, obviously it went through what is ecological psychology. From that lecture, what did you, like, how would you explain ecological psychology? Obviously you can see the notes, so you know what my next question is going to be.
I didn't really know, even from that conversation. It was...
Okay, rephrase the question.
All right.
What do you think cognitive psychology is?
A bunch of bollocks.
Okay, funny one you are.
Sorry, you are.
Well, it's not though. It's not all a bunch of bollocks, because obviously brain does exist. Neuroscience is somewhat valid in some environments. It's just the ecological validity of a lot of the tests are limited. So it's not all bollocks. Yeah, and the brain is obviously important. You can't say that it's not. So cognitive
It was
science.
interesting how so many eco psychologists, some of them were arguing that the brain just doesn't exist. And I'm like, what?
I think that's where they've gone in. They've dug themselves a hole inside of their philosophy. They haven't thought it through, and they're leading down a route that just doesn't make any sense, which is what Miguel was talking about in his talk, the ecological psychology approach, which is where some ecological psychologists make the brain very minimal in the way that we perceive the world. But that's a load of rubbish, because the brain has to be important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have evolved the way it is. So the minimalization of the brain's influence is silly. However, what the brain does with the rest of the body, that is where psychology comes in. Guy, I think he said in the first day that a lot of people in psychology think psychology is about, what is it? The mind and behaviors, linking mind with behaviors, but actually it should be combined, something like that. And I feel the same. When you look at psychology, psychology itself is essentially everywhere.
Yeah.
If I tweeted about this the other day, mind-body connection. When is the mind and body not connected? Like, how do you enhance a mind-body connection? What does that even mean? Like, that is psychology in a nutshell. Psychology is the ability to communicate with the environment you're in, the organism communicating with the environment you're in. So what is ecological psychology?
I think, come on. I think ecological psychology is the relationship between us and the environment that we're in. And that's all I can really grasp, and the relationship between that. Like, us as the body organism thing and our environment that we're in. That is my kind of, it's that relationship between the two is my like, but it also, I don't like it. It doesn't feel quite enough either.
So this is going to relate to a point like point 7 for reference for you, John. There was a flash talk talking about ecological psychology as its own discipline.
Yes.
And I just said, nah, rubbish, because ecological psychology is not a thing.
No.
I don't think it's a thing or should be a thing.
No.
Yes.
It's an explanation. It's not a thing. It's kind of the action, the noun. Noun? I never remember those two.
Verb.
It's the verb. It's the thing that we're doing. It's not a thing on its own.
And this is where, so I don't know whether you're in the conversation, but I was having a conversation with Vincent and Miguel, and they were saying that, well, Miguel specifically was saying that ecological psychology as a field doesn't really make much sense.
No.
However, an ecological approach to varying types of psychology does make sense. And this is where Guy chimed in, and he was like, yes, I think the ecological approach to different areas of psychology makes sense. So is ecological psychology a field on its own? No, but there are lots of approaches to psychology that you can put into a book such as the Introduction to Ecological Psychology. What does the ecological approach of visual perception look like? What does the ecological approach of kinesthetic and haptic perception look like, etc., etc.? And that is where I think a lot of the other flash talks and conversations went. That sort of direction of what's the eco approach?
Yeah. And that feels really, that feels good. Like an ecological approach to business, an ecological approach to marketing. We had that conversation, which was kind of cool. I finally got the audio synced over, so I'm going to listen to that one today.
Yeah, I think having an eco approach to a subject makes more sense for me, because when you look at all of the domains of psychology, some of them BS, some of them pseudoscience, a lot of them pseudoscience, and a lot of them being very oversimplified inside the public domain. When you look at them from an ecological perspective, ecological validity has to come involved. Like, that term has to come with the ecological approach.
Yeah.
Which means you can poo-poo a lot of what's spoken about in society when it comes to psychology. One example that comes to mind is Paddy Galloway. For those inside of YouTube, you'll know the name. He's probably the biggest YouTube consultant for YouTube creators. He's consulted with the likes of Mr. Beast, Trahan, etc., Ryan Trahan, etc. And he tweeted a couple of weeks ago now about you need to understand the psychology of your audience. And I was like, what the f does that mean? Like, psychology? What are you talking? Are you talking about behaviors? Are you talking about behavior science? Or are you talking about how they learn? Are you talking about how they perceive things? Are you talking about how they think? Like, what element of psychology are you talking about? Because then you also have the psychologies of, as you mentioned earlier, introvert, extrovert. Is that a thing? Learning science, that's psychology. Is that a thing? No, but people think it's a thing. So we now talk
So
about
it is a thing.
expectations.
And if people think it's a thing, then it's a thing.
Yeah, and I was like, you got to be more specific than that. Psychology is too broad.
Yeah, what I just said that captured something that I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like these labels that we put, what is an ecological approach to these labels? Because they're labels that people care about a lot. Introverts, extroverts, ambiverts.
Ambiverts?
Yeah, so there are people who are both introverted and extroverted.
You mean people?
Yeah. Yeah.
You mean to say that the environment changes the label?
Yeah.
I never would have thought that.
Yeah. And it's and that was quite interesting for me going from from Germany to Atomicon, and the environment was so fascinatingly different. And I think there was a really good thing. Most of the presentations were very, I don't know, high energy,
Yeah, upbeat,
upbeat,
marketing-esque.
and
Yeah,
marketing-esque. And then the final presentation was Chris Do from the future. And I was like,
he's from the future.
yeah, I know, right? That's the business, not time.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. His presentation was completely different. It was so much more low-key, relaxed. It was just a conversation. And I read his kind of reflection on Atomicon and his presentation, and he didn't finish. He literally finished it, if I remember rightly. He finished it 24 hours, not even 24 hours before he was meant to go on stage. And my perception of that presentation was that it was well-oiled, completely perfect and amazing, because I liked what he had to say. Didn't agree with everything he had to say, but I'm not going to anymore. But I liked the fact, and it was a much more relaxed presentation, and it was such a different experience, and it was a relief because everything had been high, boom, 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 boombastic, everything in your face, in your face, in your face, in your face. And there was a relaxed bit at the end. And I'm like, that ended it perfectly for me. Meaning he was uncomfortable in the environment he was in because it was a different environment. And yet everybody absolutely adored him. A lot of people had never heard of him before, which I don't understand. Like, I just don't understand.
Have you been on social media?
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting how people were absolutely obsessed with him afterwards.
I think that actually relates very nicely with the next point, which is perception is never static. This point came specifically from visual perception and saying that it's never static. This comes back to the analogy that I like to use when it comes to a picture versus a video. The perception of Chris before the presentation started is going to be one thing, but as the presentation goes on, your perception changes. And I think the perception as you move around, as they move around, as the conversation moves forwards, perception obviously changes. So you can't just look at it and go, right, that person was like this, that person was like that. Because snapshots are not that useful unless you're in an environment where you're looking at a specific snapshot, in which case it's extremely constrained. And if it's an extremely constrained environment, then is that really true perception? No. It's a snapshot, just like the illusions. Illusion of illusions. just for context, we were talking about visual illusions and how visual illusions, because if you were to actually look around them and move around them inside of real space, they're no longer an illusion because you perceive them fully for what they are. So it's an illusion that they're actually an illusion, which is kind of ironic.
I love it. The illusionary illusion.
Yes, yes. Now, affordance was also challenged a bit. The term affordance was challenged, and Miguel was saying that it's too broad. We have too many affordances. What were your thoughts on that?
Don't like it. It feels like, yes, there are too many affordances, but that's kind of the point, because it's a dynamic system. So there's a lot of things in that system. It was interesting for me, as a lot of what I experienced of like eco approach to what we do was constraints focused versus affordance focused. And there was much more discussion around affordances than there were constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to me, that is why I lean to constraints, talking about constraints versus affordances, because affordances are there and trying to accommodate all of those affordances is, yes, that's correct. But they exist. They are.
I think for me, I spoke with Miguel briefly about this. It was over lunch though, so we were sort of like half eating, drinking, and doing other stuff. But the way that he is looking at affordances is that he sees information in the environment as an affordance. And the way that I see an affordance is your ability to perceive that information as an affordance. Because just because you've perceived a lot of information doesn't mean you perceive all of the affordances the information gives you. Because experiences, i.e. bifurcations through phase space, changes the way that you perceive information as either affordances or not. So the way that he was he was naming affordances, but in my mind, he was naming information, which to me was the difference. And yes, information is everywhere.
Yeah.
But if you attune yourself to certain pieces of information with prior experiences through phase space, through time, etc., then you're going to perceive the information in a different way, i.e., potentially perceive an affordance, which is where learning, i.e., experience through time space, phase space, as you go through time, information can be perceived in multiple different ways, therefore having various affordances. If you haven't seen information be used in certain ways before, and there is no wave essentially inside of those neural connections in your brain, and there's no attractor into the information in the environment, then you're not going to perceive the affordance. Like if you're a child and you look at some high-tech machine in a science lab, you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to see information, you're going to see attractors, maybe you see buttons and you push all the buttons. You ain't got a clue what's going on. The scientist goes in there, they know which button to push in which order to get a certain thing to appear or to happen.
Yeah.
The information's the same, but the affordances the individuals perceive are different because of the experiences they've had inside, like through time, so the attractors are somewhat different. That's the way I see the difference between affordance and information, and I think this is a very nuanced conversation, of course, but when you add constraints into that conversation, affordances can't be everywhere. What you do is you constrain the available information, which therefore reduces the amount of affordances, but it still leaves open a lot of affordances and exploration of affordances in the environment, which is where, to me, you can apply eco-psych or the eco approach to the world, which is what a lot of
ecological approach to the world.
Yes,
beautiful. I love that.
But yeah, that's where I see the conversation moving, is like a lot of the lectures were theoretical and abstract, and in order for there to be practicality in there, constraints have to be discussed.
Yeah, and that was I was very surprised at the lack of constraints and conversations around constraints. That was something that I noticed really early on. I was like, okay, cool, affordances, yeah, but what about constraints? Why aren't we talking about that? Because that is very much, as you were saying, like an actual practical application of what we're talking about. But it's so theoretical. That was the thing
It
that
is a
caught
very
me.
new science.
Yes, and I think everyone's very excited. It felt like a bunch of nerdy people getting together and just talking nerdy shit the whole entire time, which was amazing. But it was interesting. You were saying that often the best parts of these conferences or presentations or things is the conversations afterwards, and that has been my experience in business conferences. Except, oh my gosh, that sucked for me. Like when I went to Atomicon, one of the things that I was excited about is having conversations with lots of people, but it wasn't. It was nowhere near the same. Now, maybe that was because I was speaking to the wrong people, or the environment wasn't there for those conversations, or I don't know what it was, but it was very different. It was like everyone was talking. One of the things that caught me from Atomicon, I know, right?
What a great descriptor. They were talking.
One of the things from Atomicon was their introduction of like how to talk to people. It's like go ask and say, what do you do? And I'm like, why? I don't care. I want to have actual deep conversations with people. So I put this into my introduction. If you want to just talk about the weather or talk about something, one thing or the other, then don't come talk to me because it's going to be a waste of time and I'm going to be bored. Because it's like I want to have deep, interesting, pokey questions. That's what I'm looking for from anyone. And it was interesting how one of my favorite interactions during that time was with someone else. And we were was with someone else. Was with a fellow business owner who is neurodiverse. And we shifted from it wasn't what do you do, it was what is your superpower, with someone asked us, and I'm like, it's
I don't like it.
better,
I don't like it.
but I don't like it because I don't have a superpower. Like I don't class it as a superpower. Like
My
what
superpower is being normal.
and it was and it wasn't the person I was speaking to. It wasn't Manextra who I was talking with. Someone asked us that question, and I'm like, I could sense that both myself and Manextra were like, I don't know. I don't really see it as that. It's just the thing that I do. It is just a thing that I do in a very unique experience, and like our perception of our own things that we do is very different.
Yeah,
And I found that interesting.
I agree.
And that kind of calls me on other things. It was interesting for me as someone who was not in education. Like I haven't been in education since college.
Wait, which
Like
conference are you talking about?
I'm talking going back to Berlin.
Okay, right.
It's very interesting.
You're at Atomicon, and then I was like, education?
Yeah, I know. You know,
Okay,
rabbit hole.
right.
Yeah.
I've now centered myself. You can carry on.
Thank you. It was really interesting from my perspective as someone who had not been to a lecture in that way. I had never been to a university lecture, not experienced one in my life. I've been to a college lecture, and the difference was incredibly new. Like it was a very new experience, which I enjoyed.
Like I acknowledged that, but I didn't think of it in that way. So I'm curious how what were you expecting from the lecture? Because it was very much a university lecture, which we'll get onto a little bit later. What good, bad, ugly? What were your expectations?
What was my expectations? Or sorry.
Yeah, what were your expectations, and did it match in a good way, bad way?
I didn't have any expectations. I was entering completely blind, I think. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't really expecting anything. I was just like, okay, cool, let's see what this is like. I had no reference point to go from. So I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to go along. I'm going to see. We're going to talk about some nerdy shit. That was kind of all I had.
Did you think you'd be sitting in a chair looking at a screen?
Yeah, pretty much. That's about, yeah. Yeah. Which it kind of matched anyway, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah, like I say, I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, when it comes to the memory lecture, I found it really interesting because the way she was speaking about memory and the way that, so for context, the lady that was talking about it comes from Canada, one of the bigger memory research groups, and she's essentially the only one in the eco world. So it's like, hey, all you people over there, I think a little bit different. Can we explore something else? And we spoke right before we started this conversation. I don't remember much from the conference, but as we've spoken, things have popped up. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this, and I remember that, and this happened, and etc. etc. So I hadn't stored memories of what's going on. It's just I'm remembering as I'm reliving the environment that I was in. And that's where, to me, stories become really helpful, because you can tell yourself a story or you can relive a story. This relates to some of the education stuff I'm going through at the moment. So some of the teachers teaching other teachers is so dumb. They're like, oh yeah, we need to do more testing. Why? We need to do more homework. Why? Like, just tell people a story that you're going to remember. They remember experiences. They remember practical experiences. Most of the memories I have from school are from people either messing up, me laughing at things, or me doing something that was interesting or unique that wasn't sitting on my bum staring at a screen doing more tests. So a story is useful for memory. And that's not because we store it in our brains, but because we remember it as we relive it.
Yeah.
Because you remember things.
I think I took a lot out of her presentation because, like, for me, because my brain is still kind of in the middle of, like, between the two of, like, the eco psych and the cog psych. I know it's not quite that, but for simplicity, it's true-ish.
True enough.
I loved that.
It's true enough.
That bit, the true-ish. I was like, yes, I am putting that in my vocabulary. Yeah. True-ish. False-ish.
True enough. Yeah.
True enough. I loved that. That bit. It was really nice for that presentation because it pulled all of the stuff that I'd grown up learning, the eco psych perspective, and went, what if this? And that helped make some connections in my brain and allowed me to kind of go, okay, this is this and this is that, and
connections in your brain.
Oh yeah, connections in my brain. I knew exactly what I said. That I was like, oh crap, that's disgusting, and I hate that. But okay.
But that right there is why I think CogPsych is so easily interpreted as true. Because we say those sorts of things in natural language. Oh yeah, the connection in my brain, or my brain started running, or like all those sorts of analogies.
My brain is full.
Yeah.
And I even know, like, when I said that, I was like, that's not a thing. It's not a thing, but why do I say that? And it's interesting, like, what that Robin's lecture did was like, okay, this is that, let's shift. And I took more notes on that one than I think most of them. I took more notes on that one because I was like, okay, cool, this really, like,
resonates
with my, like, experience of the two.
Do you like my use
and
of
I enjoyed like right at the beginning their comment of like, okay, it's a joke. CogPsych is a joke in the eco world, but let's imagine it's not. That summarized and simplified grossly, but that's what I got from it. Was like everyone else here is an eco psychologist. I'm not. And I'm like, interesting. I'm looking forward to this because that really perked my interest quickly. And I was like, okay, cool, go. You have my attention. And it was very, I enjoyed the way that the explanations were done because you could see both sides and both sides were valid in this environment. Were they ecologically valid? No. But they were valid in the environment that we were in this learning environment that we were in. For me, it was like, ah, cool. This principle, this, that. Ah, yes, yes. I see the differences. Just stating them really clearly, which I hadn't seen before.
Yep.
So I really enjoyed. That was one of my favorite. Yeah.
Presentations. Yeah, I feel like again, this is one of those experiences where I've looked at the research myself, and when the presentation was going through, I'm like, yep, cool, yep, I agree. And the points that I have down in our little note is resonator. The resonance of activity in the brain, rather than it being specified neural connection to create a schema or an engram in the brain in which stores all the memories, etc., etc. It's much less specific and isolated, and more of a process, as there is neural activity when the brain activates in this certain pattern with variations. Then you're going to remember other parts of that activity.
I really enjoyed that. That was like, oh, like the thing that comes to mind is like, you know, those tuning forks.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, Dong! Oh, I just my brain. I literally just saw my notes that the brain is a self-tuning resonator, and I'm like, yes, yes.
The thing that makes me giggle about that is how a lot of cog psych people explain neural activity. This part of the brain lights up and is more active when they're doing X, Y, Z. But then when it comes to memory, they suddenly forget about this brain lights up activity thing, and it's stored in the, most of the time, hippocampus is mentioned. It's stored there. That's where the memories are, and they're in engrams, or your long-term memory, your short-term memory, your working memory, whatever model you want to use. They're always adding this place, this thing to activity, and I'm like, they're trying to explain things. Maybe I'm missing something, but I feel like they're trying to explain things through both lenses, which just adds more questions. I'm like, yeah, but if there's an activity of various neurons, but you're saying the connection needs to be strengthened, like how does that work? How do you strengthen one connection if a memory is an activity of multiple neurons? Is that every single connection between all of the neurons that have been activated get increased by arbitrary number of 1? Or is it a connection between specific neurons that get arbitrary increase of 1? Or like, it logically doesn't make sense in my mind. I can't see how you can strengthen a connection if it's activity of multiple neurons. Like, I don't get it. It doesn't compute. There's another
It does
one
not
for you.
compute. Does not compute.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me. And this is where memory in the brain really starts to intrigue me. Intrigue me with the conversation, because a lot of neuroscience is obviously brain heavy. A lot of cognitive science, brain heavy. What if, the analogy I like to use with the car and the music, what if we remember with our body as well as our brain, which I think we do, because emotions, feelings, like all the other senses that we have to perceive the world, take part in memory. Because neurons, yes, it happens in the brain, but there are multiple examples of people that have got brain damage but can still play a musical instrument. Piano obviously comes to mind a lot. And there are people that have had serious brain injuries but can still do some physical things. So is that they have muscle memory? No, because there isn't a brain in muscles. But there still must be some sort of acquisition of skill.
I just remembered.
Yes.
I was just remembering when in the presentation when someone mentioned muscle memory, you're like, I felt you convulse.
You know, like the Wicked Witch of the West in Wizard of Oz, and she like shrivels up. Like
Yeah,
that.
you
That's how I
shrivel.
felt. I was like,
You're like, oh, no, that's the method of memory. It's very funny because you're just listening and it's very comical. Your reactions are
you,
hilarious.
you now understand why a lot of my lecturers when I was at uni.
Hey, did you?
Because it's either I have this like verbal need to say something, so I either mumble it under my breath, which obviously everyone around me can hear. I spout it out in a question, which has tonality behind it, which is typically kind of aggressive because I'm like, I disagree with you. I need to ask you this question now. Or my body is like, hey, come look at me. I really disagree with you, but I'm not going to say anything, sort of thing. I can't just sit there with a straight face and do nothing, because then I'm like seething inside, and then I can't focus on whatever's going on. It's something I learned inside of school, is if I just sit there with a straight face and constrain myself and be like, right, don't make a scene, don't do this, that, and the other, I can't focus for the rest of the lesson, because that's all I'm thinking about. I'm just thinking, do not make it obvious that you vehemently disagree with that person, or you have an argument you want to make. Just don't say it, don't do it, be still, don't move, don't say anything, don't be offensive. And then lesson's over, you're like, yeah, I don't remember the last 20 minutes.
You're spending all that time concentrating on not moving.
Exactly. So I've just gone, you know what, F it, I'm gonna let my body do the thing. So my body just does its thing, and then I consume all the other stuff, which is how I would suggest people do. But that's what I mean by remembering things. I remember what?
It links to one of the questions that Davos had. Like, one of the things that Davos said in one of our comments of like right and wrong behavior. It just triggered that.
Do you want to tie this one in? Because yeah, we've been going for a while.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that Davos was saying in his comment to us was around how a subject that should be taught in school is what good behavior looks like, is how good behavior looks like and how it is actually done. And it was really interesting because I was like, okay. My first question is it a teacher's responsibility to teach good habits? What is a good habit? What is good behavior? And that all depends on, guess what, the environment that we're in. Because in school, one of the things that I've kind of realized or recognized is school, you don't learn in school.
Rephrase that.
Okay, fine. You learn how to complete a test in school.
Thank you.
That is all you do.
I feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah, you learn how to complete tests correctly and get the highest marks in school. Well, highest marks you can. Whereas the actual, what I would class as learning, as in the experience of what we do now. Huh?
Effective learning.
Effective learning is not taught in school. Not really.
Rarely.
Unless it is.
Rarely. I think teachers try and do it, but because of the constraints specifically of the school environment and competitive nature, the exams and all the other that I'm doing a video on, because of all of that, the teachers can't teach in the way that I would imagine a lot of them want to teach. So it's not the teacher's fault.
No, absolutely not. It is not the teacher's fault, it's the system. But it was like, is it the teacher's responsibility to teach good behavior, and how do we define what good behavior actually is? Like, my kind of gut reaction is it not the child? The child will see the affordances and the constraints in the environment and learn through that, versus because what is appropriate in one place may not be appropriate in another. For example, you were discussing this like at that conference, no one cared that you were convulsing in the corner. But in school, people would care. They would tell you to shut up and stop it and get out and all that stuff. And the same thing, it's like, when at home, my kids are very different. And you can, because they feel safe to behave the way they want to. because we have an environment that, but what is good and what is bad?
Just going to input a term there. Psychological safety is a concept inside of sports psychology, which has been pushed inside of the coaching education literature. Psychological safety inside of educational environments, i.e., environments where an educator is trying to support a learner, is extremely important. But because of the school environment, psychological safety is so overlooked. And the way I interpreted Douglas's comment is, when the good behavior isn't told to children, they typically have or exhibit a bad behavior. And I think, I may be getting this wrong, but the bad behavior is normally a lazy behavior. It's, I'm just not going to bother. I'm just not going to try. I'm going to be annoying. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to misbehave, whatever that means. And a lot of the time, from my experience anyway, both in coaching and in my own school environments, is that those people do those things because they want to be doing something. Like, humans were not built to sit and do nothing. We were built as animals to move around, do things, to either mentally or physically engage with something, which means there's got to be something that happens. And unless there's a consequence to actions, then they're the things you'll do. And if the consequence, because punishments aren't normally actually beneficial, if the consequences aren't that good, i.e. punishments, then you might just urge them on to do it again, which is where, like, the environment that school pushes and schools encourage, they don't encourage bad behavior, but they don't discourage good behavior. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, because it's also like, even if you are doing all your grades,
encourage good behavior. I should have said that, not discourage. Yeah, because the other way around, I said discourage, and they meant the same thing. Carry on.
Yeah, I just heard encourage.
Yeah, you knew what I meant, but
yeah. But like, even from as a school SWAT, as they say, like, it was never really.
Just to clarify, what does SWAT mean for those from America, because they may not use the same term?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, basically, goody two shoes, does all his homework, does everything, sits quietly in class, likes the teachers like him, all that stuff.
Yeah. Carry on. Because they may be thinking like SWAT is like, because when I hear SWAT now, I think of police.
SWOT analysis.
Like, no, I think of police, right? Like SWAT police, like with guns and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not SWAT.
No. Yeah, and so even with that, it was never really, I suppose, praised, or there was no positive reinforcement of that behavior. It was, let's look at the naughty kids as it's defined. Let's look at these people. Let's look at the people who are not behaving and deal with them and put them and sort them out. Not look at the people who are actually doing the work and are kind of ticking the boxes, which has been the experience of my son, who is very much like me. He does his work, he asks his questions, but he will get up once he's fed up. Once the environment can't fit what he needs and his needs, and he's bored, he'll get up and walk around, which obviously in a primary school setting where he currently is, the environment that he's in, that's okay because everybody gets up. But in the secondary school educational system, which is what's coming next for him, that is not going to happen. Most of the teachers there do not want to have interesting conversations about completely different subjects. They want you to sit down, shut up, and do the work. Obviously, hyper generalizing. Apologies to teachers who actually care about their children's education. But a lot of the wow, spicy. But Bang. That's the experience of like
shot fired.
But I do believe that a lot of the teachers are not like that. They are just so constrained in their system that they don't have a choice, and they're just trapped. And I do say that very clearly. But that's the thing.
I think this relates really well with a couple of the points that I wanted to make from the conference, which is so while this conference is going on, I'm like, how do I apply the ecological approach to this that's going on right now? Because some of the lectures were just so frustrating because they blasted loads of words on a slide. And I'm like, I ain't reading all that. That's not happening. That's why I took pictures. And and they would completely disengage with the audience and just, I'm reading stuff off slide, or I'm telling you a story. And I'm like, okay, how do we make lecturing ecological? How do we make lessons ecological? I gave John a couple of examples while I was out there about what my head of course used to do, which, yeah, I'm pushing the line a little bit. and it comes
That made me giggle.
it comes back
It's
to
evil, but I love it.
Yeah. I'm not going to tell you, because then if I actually do a presentation with everyone, I'll be like, oh yeah, that was the thing. But yeah, so I think when it
I
comes
had that experience. Sorry, it just reminded me of yesterday. My little boy had found a hypnosis thing on Audible. Don't even go that. We can talk about that if we want to. But and
another time.
he's struggling with sleeping at the moment. And so he wants to sleep, but is unable to turn off. So he's using hypnosis to help, which it used to help me, absolutely. But he asked how, and obviously I used to do hypnosis, so I'm able to hypnotize people, etc., etc. That was such funny. Wait, what? And he said, "Well, how does it work?" I'm like, and I was about to explain. I went, "Hang on. If I explain this to you, it will probably no longer work unless you're in person with a hypnotist who knows what they're doing and can use utilization to kind of shift that and shift the perception, which grabs your attention, and it works then to avoid loads of conversations that are drilled into cogs. I can now try to like, I don't like that, I don't like that, oh, I don't like that, oh, I really don't like that. So that's going to be fun for me to go back through and go, okay, cool. So an ecological approach to hypnosis.
Yeah,
You want
good luck
it.
with that. Good
Yeah, I
luck with
know.
that.
But yeah, so and it was interesting because he was there. I was there, like, I can explain it to you, but it will not work if I explain it to you. Oh, why? Because it's an agreement you've made to do it. Like, you want to go to sleep, but you're not sure how. So you will listen to what the hypnotist says, because that is what you want, and that's the only way it works. If someone doesn't want to be hypnotized, they can't. It's a social contract between the two of you that you agree to do whatever the hypnotist does. That is literally all hypnosis is. It's a social contract that you agree to do that. Yeah, because hypnosis cannot make you do things that you don't want to do, and that actually. And by don't want to do, I don't mean, oh, you're embarrassed by, because no one wants to run around on stage barking like a monkey, but you do, because you want to be part of the production, you want to, yeah, etc., etc. And so I explained to her, and I said, I can't tell you. If I tell you, that will no longer work for you, because that's my experience. Once I learned all of the tricks, it didn't work. I couldn't just listen to a CD and everything worked, because I knew what they were doing. I understood what was happening behind. And so that was kind of a related point that I can't remember what it was related to now.
Ecological lecturing.
Yes. Oh, ecological lecturing, and your your lecturer's trick to get people engaged, and you couldn't explain it, because if you'd have explained it,
No, then
it wouldn't work.
Well, it's not that it wouldn't work. It's just the people that have listened to the podcast would know. Anyway, but yeah. So, what does ecological lecturing look like? And I think this relates to one of the other presentations, which is about youth development and growth in the environment. So they were talking about growing up in the environment. You see certain things, and some kids develop faster because they see XYZ more than others.
I think I missed that one. I needed the blue. I was really looking forward to that one, but I missed that one.
Yeah, it was one of those where I think you came back like 2 or 3 minutes into it, and obviously because they're only 10 minutes, it's fairly short. But yeah, and he was basically saying that children recognize faces and ceilings when they're young because that's all they really see, but those that get pushed around and see the world typically engage faster in the world because they've seen information, and that's the approach that they were looking at. And when I look to apply that in lecturing, I feel the same, because when you look at a lecture and you're just looking at slides or listening to the person, there's very limited information in the environment. So how do you make the environment more yeah, just more. How do you make a lecturing environment much more of an experience than just hey, watch this? Seth Godin, I think, does this really well with the way that he does his presentations, because he does pictures. So each slide is a different picture telling a different story. So he tells a story through a picture. So you've got obviously the saying of the pictures hold 1,000 words. There is a picture, and you will associate the picture to something. There could be a meme on there, and it reminds you of the meme. And maybe in remembering what Seth is saying, you remember the meme or the picture that was on the screen. Then you remember why he spoke about that thing. Then you remember what he was talking about. Then you remember the other pictures that he was talking about. And you start recreating the experience that you had through storytelling. And all you needed was a part of the story, a part of the resonance to start going. So you'd using your tuning fork as the example, you just needed one little ping to tune yourself back to that experience. And that is what I would want lectures to be. I would want lectures to have lots of different moments where you can tune into what was spoken about. And there are lots of ways to do that. You could do that physically. You could do that with emotional intelligence, throwing someone a ball and saying, right, answer this question. You're like, oh my God, I have no idea how to answer this question. Just make mistakes. Like, and having the psychological safety in that environment to do that creates those sorts of learning environments which to me are more ecologically valid, because everyone will then fail because they won't know the answers to things. Instead of them going, I don't know, make a guess. Make an educated guess. What do you think? Do you disagree with me? Because some of the best lectures I had at university were arguments. It's most of the time where I'm arguing with a sports science lecturer and I'm saying, I disagree with you. And they're coming up with like biology XYZ, and I'm coming up with psychology and sociology XYZ, and they don't know the research. And it's where we're arguing backwards and forwards. Arguing is a good thing in academia. Arguing backwards and forwards about this topic. And they're the conversations that I remember, not the ones where I just sat there and listened to a load of stuff from a whiteboard. Like, no. So that's how I would want to see lectures and teaching happen. Where's the retrieval practice in that? The cog psych teachers are saying, in the practice, how do you make an argument? You remember the points that you're trying to make, and then you explain them. That is retrieval practice. Like in actual conversation, in a real world, ecologically valid environment, not you answering a question on a piece of paper. Which actually brings us to VR and AR.
That one was cool. I liked that one.
That's because it had tech, and you're like, tech, I know this.
Yeah, basically. But it was interesting because when I saw that, when the presentation was around VR and the whole eco approach, and it's like, it's just constrained. All I was repeating, it's just a constraint. It's just a constraint. That's literally, you're talking about constraint. It's a constraint. That's all it is. Like, which is interesting because it was like, oh, what is this? It's like, you know, this and
yeah, I think it was Ed presenting. Was it like depicted reality or something?
Duality of perception on the surface and the surface was one of the things I had.
Right, that's something just you wrote down. Yeah, to me that's just like cool. Yeah, he tried to explain the environment as slightly different, AR and VR, and he used the recent Apple product release as the example, which I don't disagree with what he was saying when it comes to saying that, oh, it's a different world. It's a different way of perceiving things. So you could get like motion sickness from delays in visual perception. Some sensory perceptions are missing, like tactile and taste. Those sorts of haptic receptors can't do or use anything. So I agree with that. And there are certainly no substances or anything inside of the VR world that you can reach out and grab physically.
Yet.
Yes. And I think it's going to be difficult to mimic a lot of that. I mean, you'd have to put yourself in a fully haptic suit with things very well mapped and attuned to environments and everything else that's going on. And to me, it's like, okay, what's the point? Big questions there. Why not just live? But at the end of the day, for me, the way I see VR and AR is a training tool. It's a constrained environment to train in certain environments, and it's a training tool for a different purpose. So when I look at some of the sports like golf or tennis or football, and you look at some of the closed skills, you can reduce or you can add some constraints in AR or VR environments that you can't add inside of real environments.
Yeah.
Or you can't add as easily or take away as easily. So it allows you to create a different training environment, a different practice environment. Is it the real environment? No, but it's a good training tool, and that's the way I see AR and VR. I don't see it as a true working environment yet, and I don't think it will really exist for a long time. Yes, people are saying, oh, but this, that, and the other. No. Shared affordances. What does that mean? This is where my brain immediately went to Rob Gray's argument with
Noun verb?
Matt. I can't remember the guy's name. I think it's Albert was his last name. Maybe it's a Mark or an Andy. I don't remember. Some guy. Yeah, Robin said person, they were having a discussion about shared affordances or mental models. And that's where this comes back to me. And when they were discussing it, they were talking about mental models in team sports. So there's tactics, and tactics from this other person was saying, oh, it's a mental model. Each person has mentally said, okay, this is how we're going to play football. And Rob was saying, why can't they just perceive shared affordances? So there's information in the environment, and they are perceiving the affordances differently. So they both have unique experiences of the perception, but they perceive the similar affordances and therefore attune themselves to that affordance, rather than there being some script in their head going, this thing has happened, we must do this thing. Because if something changes that wasn't in the mental model, how do those individual organisms then react? Because there's no script for it. So how do they then know what they should or shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, it links to the hypnosis thing I was talking about earlier. Like when you're solo one-on-one, you will be, in terms of hypnosis from a hypnotherapy standpoint, it's very much a one-on-one. So you would have discussions that you wouldn't normally have, and it would expose areas that you wouldn't want to do. Whereas stage hypnosis, when you're kind of just making them look silly and hilarious and forgetting your name and things like that, is a very different experience. And the social contract, I suppose, or the shared affordance, that's probably a more accurate term, of like when you're in stage hypnosis, you're there to entertain, to perform, to play, which is why you agree to do these things, which in a kind of hypnotherapy sense, that would not be the agreement that you had between the two. So I think it's very much like a shared affordance kind of makes sense in that specific example that just related. It very much is like, yeah, that's basically what that is. It's a shared affordance. We all agree. That's what I suppose. Would you say that's what a social construct actually, like a social contract, as I called it, is? It is a shared affordance. We all agree.
I think so. The way that I would look at it is connected cognition or collaborative cognition, because you've both engaged in this environment of cognition, because both organisms are thinking. So they
organizing.
Yeah, basically they're organizing the information in the environment in the same way, which leads to similar affordances. Do they choose to attune themselves to the same affordances? That is where I think the autonomy of the organism comes into play, which is where the dynamic element of that environment comes in, because the one person may attune to one affordance more than another, so you'll get different results and different endpoints. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's a collective cognition. It's the easiest way to explain it. However, I do think that's a little bit different from tech affordances, right?
Yes.
Because tech affordances, even though lots of people will be looking at the same tech, the same information, and they perceive the similar affordances, I don't see that as collective cognition, because each individual has their own experience with the tech. You could argue it's collective cognition if you give the tech consciousness, but that's a whole other conversation. I would say that is embodied cognition between the organism and the technology.
Yeah.
The technology with another organism, yes, you could argue an organism's perceiving the same affordance, but I wouldn't class that as shared affordances. I would class that as an affordance through technology, through a piece of equipment in an environment that is perceived in similar ways.
Yeah.
And that conversation was really cool when it comes to UI design in text. Like, how do you create UI for people to understand how to navigate this tool, how to navigate this application? I think consistency with application design is the biggest affordance inside of tech development. Like the 3 lines going across, everyone recognizes that as a menu.
Yeah.
It's information in the environment that most people perceive as a menu. If it's not...
That one I missed. I did see the other one, but it was that one I missed, which was the one I was like, ooh. I might go grab your notes from that. I don't know how many notes you made.
Probably not many. I did speak with the guy that did that presentation afterwards, so we may be getting him on to have a chat.
Yes, I remember.
You remember now?
Yeah, remembering.
It wasn't in your store, no?
No.
Or maybe it was in your store. It's just the connections between the neurons wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, smiling.
Yeah.
Did sheathe it more? Because obviously I've got kind of wires.
Yes, definitely. Right. So to the comment section.
I love these things.
To the comment section. Well, let's go for it. Let's try and be fairly quick. I'll go through my 3, and then you go through your remaining 2. I've gone through 2 comments already, so I'll pop them up on screen for those watching on YouTube, so you know what I'm talking about when I'm there. So. It's rare to create new notes about a subject. That was a comment from Davos, and I'm the same. When it comes to bringing sources together, information together, ideas together, I put it in a subject file. A project file is what I call them, and I don't create many of them anymore. Having said that, though, with the way that I'm doing my research, because I'm diving really deep, I'm making more subject files, but they're really specific on the subject. So, for example, inside of educational science, I'm looking into the UK education system, and inside there, I've got PISA. Now, PISA is an organization, which I could just leave as one word, but there's a whole story behind PISA, and that's why it's become a new file, because it is a topic. It's a story in itself. What does PISA do? Why was PISA created? Who do PISA assess? Why do they assess them that way? And all those sorts of related questions. So when it comes to creating a new subject note, there's got to be reasons why there's points behind it. It's not an atomic note because there's going to be loads of questions, loads of sections to it. It becomes a project. So I don't create many project notes that I actively work in. I have a lot of potential project notes.
Yeah, something that I've been doing as I've been coming back into this vault from my side. It's been like, okay, cool. So this isn't a project in the sense that I thought, well, it is a project because the project is the overall category, but I've basically completely stolen your style because it makes sense. And like, I realized a lot of what I had as projects was actually a sub-project of research. My brain just went, yeah, it was a lot less, from a business sense, it's content buckets, but that I hated. Like I had a visceral reaction to. It's not a content bucket, it is a research. It is what I'm researching. It's the topic of which I am researching, which is why I'm shifting to like, this is a research page where I'm researching AI or researching ecological dynamics in business or the ecological approach to business, which is one of the research pages I'm going to be creating. Because then I'm going to be able to merge a lot of my projects into that file because that's what I'm talking about. That's kind of the researchy bit that is there that I couldn't see, but it is now emerged with the constraints that Danny's system has. And I'm like, I like those constraints. Like the use of freaking classes has blown my brains out. I'm not going to lie. Like, since using that, I'm just like, this is so much easier now. My brain is so happy. It's made the right connections and it's now storing that information.
So when it comes to the research files, I came out with a bit of a an aha moment, because the projects that I had inside of my Obsidian vault, they were story driven. Like, this is the story I'm telling. This is all the
Yes.
research that I found, and it's related to loads of other stories I could tell. But the research files are so useful. They're not a project. They're not a story. They're just, I have loads of stuff around this thing, but I
Yes.
don't understand what story I'm trying to tell. I don't know what the project is. I just got to put it all together for something.
Michael's notebooks. Vsauce.
Oh, right. Yes, I'm with you now. So
I watched that. I watched that 3 or 4 times. Because I was like, yes, that, yes, just yes, all the yeses, love, hearts, everything. Yes. Because one of the things that I always struggle with in the PKM world, in the business PKM world, and why it matters and why should we care in business is, well, why should we care? And content creation and all of that stuff was like, I don't know where to even begin, and all of this stuff of like, well, I could just dump information, which is the business like content. It's, I'm dumping information at you, telling you what to do and go buy my shit. Whereas it's like, here's a conversation. There's something that, one of the kind of aha moments from our conversation around content creation was like making it matter. And I already knew that, but I didn't know how to put it into action. And it's like asking the questions. And it was really, I absolutely loved that conversation between Anthony Padilla and Michael, can't remember his last name, Michael Vsauce.
Yeah.
And that conversation between them and realizing that it was his own voice completely, only exaggerated. And I'm like, interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. So my relationship with content has changed considerably in like through our conversations of like, okay, cool. So it's not and so much of the content conversation in the business world is do this and behave like that and create a script in this certain way. I'm like, yeah, but I don't like any of those because I don't talk like that. I don't go, hello and welcome to my video on X. I want to do this and I'm going to show you today how to do that. No, I want to get into the actual conversations straight away and have the bloody conversations.
No, what you need to say is, I exploded all this thing and spent loads of money and did all this stuff really, really fast with like loads of like cuts to keep everyone engaged.
Oh yeah, obviously. Explosions, you know, just throw stuff on the beastification. I remember that video. I've watched that one.
There's a lot of videos talking about the beastification of YouTube. It's part of the conversation that I want to actually have with some of the video essayists on YouTube. But yeah, that's a story for another time. Right, next comment. I said that this was going to be quick. It's kind of not.
Quick? Why are you trying? If we were to go quick, it would mean we would not cover everything we want to cover, and we would oversimplify. That's not what people came for.
Learn taxes, insurance, adult paperwork at school.
Not going to work.
I agree.
It's not going to work. They go quick, done. No, I can't just leave it like that. That's going to break.
I think the only thing I have to say on that is, yes, I agree. It should be done in some way, because there is a lot of stuff that happens when you leave school that you're like, I was never prepared for this.
No.
But how you do that, I think, is a question that I don't have an answer for. The best way I can think is do it practical environments, but that is where you get into further education and building up a business as a go, as a test, as an experiment. And other countries are doing this, and that's the best thing that I've come up with. I think there's in the English and Welsh system and parts of Scottish system, you have what's called studio schools. Yeah, I know. And studio schools work on project-based. They work like learning through project-based examples. So it's like, okay, you're going to build this, or you're going to do this, or you're going to learn that. The schools are really small. They're like less than 300 people. John's like, I must look into this now.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
But yeah, so they learn through projects. And I think that would be a good place or a good way to teach this sort of stuff. But that then goes basically into business school. Like if you go into, what is it, a university technical college, similar principles happen in there as well, where you just learn business stuff. And I certainly think business school or elements of business school should be put into, I don't know what subject it would be in whatever curriculum that you're in, but learning that sort of stuff would certainly be useful.
And I think the problem with that is kids don't. It needs to matter to the kids. If it doesn't matter, it's not gonna.
Look at adults. Adults don't even learn to do their taxes until they have to pay taxes. And then they don't even remember how to do the taxes because they didn't pay attention when they were doing it in the first place. They wait till the next year and go, damn it, what have I got to do again?
And that's the thing. And also I think if it was taught, it would be taught in a singular, universal way that you have to do it this way, which for someone like me would just not have worked. The only reason I'm able to sort my taxes out and do all the lovely shit that I got to do is because I was like, okay, cool. What do I need to know? How do I need to? And it was I had to build that environment so I was able to do it, which the whole educational system will need to change to be able to teach taxes, insurance, and paperwork. It would need to be completely changed to help do that, I think.
I want to fight against that in my video because I don't think the whole system sucks.
Oh, I don't think the whole system sucks, but the way that it's taught would need to change.
But the way that it's taught is because of the constraints in the environment.
If the
you remove a couple of constraints.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Then, hallelujah, maybe we have some success with education. But removing those constraints are almost impossible because government comparison and social validity. So, my
I think this actually links, if I may, to one of my points about knowing PKM. Sure. So something that Dovos said in here was like how much they hated learning in school and how much they wish they would have known about Obsidian and other PKM programs as they started with apprenticing because they would have way more notes. And it just so happens that what's his name?
Fred.
What?
I don't know. You said what's his name? I said Fred.
It just so happens that Nick Milo is now doing a university course on PKM. And I'm, well, I don't know. I don't have that. He puts it as personal knowledge management, I think, or note taking. But, note making, because that matters. I
have opinions.
I don't know whether it would change anything. I don't like my instant gut reaction, and I'm gonna go and experiment on my kids to figure that out. Because
all parents do. Children, guinea pigs.
I'm intrigued to see whether that would make a blind bit of difference for my son, because he has so much he consumes a lot of information which he puts in his memory stores. And would he be interested in putting it somewhere? I'm not sure, because it wouldn't matter to him that much. Or would it matter to him? And if it would matter to him, why would it matter to him? And like for my daughter, I don't think she'd care at all, because she's happy. And why would I write this down? I have it here when I need it, and when I need it, I'll use it. But otherwise, I just don't care. So would it teaching PKM and personal knowledge management? I also think it kind of goes against the point of school, because as we touched on earlier, school is about passing the test more, or learning how to pass the test versus learning about learning.
I think this comes back to my experience at university. So every university that I have experienced has what's called library lectures. And library lectures are PKM lectures. They teach you about reference managers. They teach you about note takers. They teach you about how to reference things, how to find books, how to note take on books, how to do all the stuff that we do in PKM. And they are the worst attended lectures in the entire universities. All the students that I've spoken to from various universities, various courses, they go, oh yeah, I didn't attend that, or I didn't bother that, or I didn't see the point of going to that. Like, they don't understand why they need to go. Then when it comes to the assessments, they're like, oh, how did you know to do that from the library lesson? Oh yeah, I didn't bother to do that. Can you tell me now? So it's not until they find a use for it, i.e. when they're doing their assessments or they're writing something, that they need the information. And it's not until they have a purpose, again, that they find a reason why. And unless people are either interested in writing essays, which, why would you be? Interested in writing content, so writing something for either a newsletter or a blog article or for videos or for podcasts, or writing something as a piece of content or as a piece of information for you to look back to later. Unless you're doing something like that, PKM is useless. Yeah. You look at the majority of coaches, they will not take notes. They will be learning stuff and trying to apply stuff to practice, but they won't take notes. So I'm actually going to do a presentation for UK coaching about PKM. So I've been asked to, but I'm like, why should a coach take notes? Why? Like, why would they need to take notes about academia? That's not what they're doing. Their job is to help kids do whatever, or adults do whatever. So teaching PKM is, in my view, somewhat redundant at universities, unless it's directed at helping with exams. Otherwise, it just becomes this library lesson that people are like, yeah, whatever, I don't care.
And then if it's directed at doing exams, is that is so constrained.
Exactly.
So what's the point?
Exactly.
Like, there's no point, because
which is why I'm intrigued to see what
that. Sorry.
I think we've got a bit of delay there.
Yeah. The moment we leave that environment, it's useless again. Like, it doesn't have any. It has very limited usage. Truth-ish. Like, it has very limited, like, actionable things, because we're just memorizing things for tests, not in the environment that we're in and learning from a context of, like, I want to learn to create something, or I want to learn to explore a topic, or I want to, like, because it's a very different system. Like, how your PKM space would be built would be very different. It would be, I suppose it's kind of very much like the common thing around, are you a librarian who collects stuff, or are you someone who, like, you would be more librarian if you want to use those terms, which I don't really want to, but that is a good explanation, because when you're storing information from memory, when you're just storing it to do your test, one, you don't know what the questions are, but you can guess, but and it's so constrained that when you leave that and you be in the environment that we're in now, it just wouldn't make sense. Like, the way that you would take notes would not make sense.
I'm intrigued to see how Nick actually presents these things to university students, because one, from my understanding, he's doing the university lectures in a UK university, in a university in London, and he's from the American education system. So I don't know how familiar he's going to be with the types of students from England and the system that they've gone through. So it's going to be interesting, that dynamic. Also, the language he chooses to use is going to be intriguing, because I think it's UCL that he's going to.
Yeah, it is. UCLA, yeah.
Yeah. So the language he's going to use, I would imagine, is going to turn off quite a few students if he's using PKM terms, because his presentation style is very movie. Like, he's from Hollywood. Like, it's very sort of produced in the way that he explains things, and going through, like, the LYT conferences, it's very much movie magic, and I personally don't like it. Obviously some people like it, some people won't. I personally don't like it. And it's, to me, very sort of wishy-washy in the way that
the priorities on showmanship rather than education.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how people receive it, and what people do from it.
Show up.
Yeah, if they show up. I think if it does work, it'll be great for the Obsidian community.
Absolutely.
But I can't imagine him talking just about Obsidian, because Obsidian is a technical tool, and most students are not technically inclined. Do they know how to use tech? Yes. Do they know how to use things like Obsidian? No. That's why reference managers are hard to get students to adopt, and a reference manager is easier than Obsidian to adopt.
Yeah, Zotero is not easy to start with.
Well, it is if you're just doing a couple of things with it. But having spoken with multiple students that are currently doing master's degrees, they don't take notes. They take notes on like Word documents or on Notability on their iPad, and they forget and lose stuff. Yeah, I know. Or they just take notes on a notepad and pen, and then they find the references when they're doing the essay, or they wrote down the references inside of the note, then lost the note to find the reference, so then ask their friend for the... Yeah, it's just all over the place. And then you say, why don't you just use a notes app? Well, what's that? Why don't you use a reference manager? What's that? Like, I know students that have gone all the way through their undergraduate degrees without using reference managers. They write their essays using Google Scholar. They click the citation button at Google Scholar and go, yep, I'll grab that one. They don't save the PDF anywhere. They have the PDF up on their tab, and they have like 20 tabs open. They write their essay. They then save all the tabs or keep the tabs up. Once they've written the essay in the 2 or 3 days, they then close all the tabs and forget everything, because they don't need it anymore because they've written the essay. That is the majority of student life.
Word documents.
Yeah. And this is going to actually wrap out on my comments. From Dovas, it says you can only compare a specific thing with intelligence, because it's not real competition. So he was talking specifically about when you're in academia, you can only compare a specific context. So if you're learning about or testing in at this time with this topic and this experience from this perspective, then you can compare intelligence. But most of the time that doesn't happen, because everyone is different. So everyone's going to be intelligent in different ways. So it's not really a competition or comparison. It's sort of a comparison, but the only valid one is between you and you previously. I think Hank Green recently mentioned that in his video as well, actually, about like 4 years ago, Hank is less intelligent than me now, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's very true in the conversation that we're having here, because it doesn't matter what happens in PKM, in note-taking, in lecturing, in libraries or whatever. Like, at the end of the day, you're smarter today than you were yesterday, probably. Do you need all those notes? No. A lot of the stuff that we speak about here on the podcast, and a lot of the things that I speak about in conversations, the way I apply things, it's not in my notes. I don't have it in my Obsidian. I have it through experience and through practice. Which is, you don't need a note system. My parents don't have a note system, and they're pretty successful.
Yeah, and it kind of links on to my point of like Davos was, I think it was in the same. Was it in the same? I don't remember. It's like, how do you know when you use information? He was mentioning like, but I don't really mean keeping track of what you can or remember of what you learned, but more keeping track of the information you used to learn, so that you can go back later and reread a refined version of what you once knew about a subject. That's all the information you need, and references to where you can find more info about it. And like my interpretation of that is, how do you know? My question is, how do you know when you've used information? And is that a single use, or is it multiple uses? Because a lot of what I have and what I do is multiple uses. I'm thinking about it here and there, and how do I know when I'm going to use it? So I captured something to do with blooming Zelda, Legend of Zelda. And did I know I was going to use that in a presentation? I don't know. Maybe. But like, this is the thing. It's like, how do you know? And is it refined? Is it like, that was my question. Like, I'm not sure. And they also mentioned about having it as it's kind of a Wikipedia or a solo Wikipedia. And I don't know whether I like that. Like from my perspective, I'm like, why? Like, why?
I think for me, for those that have seen the Obsidian, like I have a somewhat solo Wikipedia. Like you can go through my project pages, you can see all the references and sources and stuff. And for me, the reason I do it, one, is so other people know roughly what's going on, and I can use them as reference pages to any projects that I do have. So if I reference, hey, extended cognition, if you want to know more, go look at this page. Or Feynman technique, if you want to know how much bullshit this is, go over there. The other reason, though, is when I'm in my notes, a lot of it is just sporadic points put down, as John will can attest to. It's just points with sources. And it's useful to trigger conversation and trigger ideas, which is really useful. But it's not great if I want an overview of what I thought about or what was going on. So if I want to,
a lot of like as I'm going through like my notes from the Germany trip, all I've got is just single words or an image. And I'm just like, oh yeah, that's a thought I have. But I could not recite the entire conference from those notes at all. It would be a triggering of like, oh, this is a question I had in that environment at that moment. What does that mean? And it was interesting as I was going through these notes and the relationship between my old personal vault and this vault that I've started to use more of like there is less in every note.
Yeah.
But what's there is so dense. Like the one sentence of like, oh, that sparked an entire conversation.
So I've just had a look. My UK education system, when I started working on this note, it was around 7,500 words long. And it increased with notes. I'm looking at it now. It's got 2,424 words in currently. Right? That's including all of the references down the bottom because that's a total word count. Now, I do have images in there. I've got like images and tables and stuff, but I still have some notes in here as well. So I reckon there's going to be around 2,000 words of actual content in there, which doesn't sound like much. I mean, that's not even an essay at uni. A uni essay is going to be 4,000 words. I do have bullet points in here, which, again, we wouldn't really have at uni. But there is so much information in those 2,000 words. I mean, I've got, wait, how many references do I have? I've probably got something like 50.
54.
54. I got 54 references for 2,000 words. That just shows how much information is in that. And some of those tables that I've made, I actually reference this in the script that I'm writing at the moment. It looks small. It looks easy. But by God, it took me 2 hours to make the things because there's so much information put into it.
Yeah.
So it's really dense. Like some of these tables are really dense of information. And it's just a couple of sentences afterwards. And you understand so much of the system. You're probably having a look through the note now. You're like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yes.
Because you can just look at the table and be like, why does Northern Ireland have a C star? Wales have C. England have 5 and 4, and then in Scotland it's a completely different assessment, and they have a C, but that's a national 5, and then a national 4. It doesn't even exist as ABC. It's just pass or fail. Like what?
Yeah,
and that's all from a table, but that's multiple sources condensed together. Which is where I think the wiki element comes in handy because I can bring all of those points that were like hundreds and hundreds of words long into a table. And that's, to me, where the wiki element comes in. I don't know if Dovis is the same.
Yeah. Cool.
It's certainly a stage of progress with the notes. So now we've been speaking for like 2 hours.
Was it in 2 hours? Ooh, yeah, God, yes.
It's now 12:10 for us. We started about 10:10. So yeah, I'll cut this down. It'll probably be still around 2 hours. We do have some interesting guests coming on soon. So stay tuned for that. Bye.
Bye.